very appreciative to have you with us tonight. Thank you for doing this.
I appreciate the invite. Thank you,
I
guys.
hope you enjoy this. I want to thank you also for the very broad list of topics. Now, he said he's willing to talk about fly tying, fly casting, travel, boats for fly fishing. Okay. Questions that you would ask your guide. Pat is a seasoned, experienced guide. There might be things you guys want to know. I know he's been very actively involved as a fly designer. He's also worked very closely with several rod manufacturers, line manufacturers, knows everybody in the business. So I don't think there's too many questions he might not tackle. And then as far as fish species goes, trout, bass, pike, muskie, peacock bass, golden dorado, jungle species, saltwater, including billfish. So, I mean, if you guys can't think of a question to ask this guy, you might just go watch TV right now and leave, because this is going to be cool. So, Pat, with no further ado, thank you. If you could give us just a little bio about you, you know, kind of who you are, what you do, and why
Sure.
you do this.
Thanks, Mark. Let me just ask you. So all I got to do is talk. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
This is just the second time I've ever done one of these. And Mark asked if I wanted to do a fly time thing. And I said, no way, because I figured I'd really screw that up. So that's why we came up with this format. Yeah, this week is my 33rd anniversary of having my shop, the Fly Fishers, up here in Milwaukee. And so I've been lucky enough and worked hard enough to keep the ball kind of rolling here. And done a lot of things over those 33 years. And I just had to correct one of the things you said, Mark, that I'm with Echo. I've got a design contract with Tim Rajeff, not Steve at Loomis. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be asked to help design lines and rods, lines for airflow. Rainey's came to me and asked me to design patterns for them and do some consulting work. Tim Rajeff with Echo and the Renzettis, they're like family. We kind of joke about the Renzetti suite that we've got upstairs in our house. Andy was coming here for some stuff he had done with his eyes to one of the local doctors. So he's been here a number of times. And I've got some tools that I designed with Andy. Some of those were literally done writing it down on a napkin at a table in Mexico on a fishing trip down there. Kind of the fun part about this business. And so I've done design work for them. I'm with Vexus Boats and Mercury Marine, and kind of do the crossover thing with them. They kind of want to get more exposure in the fly fishing world. And I write for what is now American Fly Fishing Magazine. It used to be Northwest, and they had 3 editions, Northwest, Southwest, and Eastern. And that's gone to 1 publication now. And I know they want to kind of push that thing. So I started out trout fishing when I was a little kid and fished for everything since I've been about 3. But for whatever reason, I guess I'm kind of known as a warm water and a saltwater guy, but that doesn't mean I don't trout fish. I love trout fishing, and it's where I cut my teeth on fly fishing. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. I don't remember all the other stuff. And after 33 years, I've got a sheet that I send the companies when they ask for that, but I can't remember it. So I hope I didn't gloss over anybody that's important to me, but I appreciate your time.
I have one question to get it started, Pat. From a shop owner's perspective and an individual who has been as deeply involved in the industry as you have, give us all kind of an overview of what this COVID thing has done to the business. I mean, I know you and I have talked about it on the phone, but share it with the guys. I mean, you know, what are your challenges daily with this thing, trying to keep the store going?
I'm kind of a professional sayer of sorry, for lack of a better term. I think I say I'm sorry 10 or 12 times a day to people because we're just having a problem getting stuff. Our business has never been better. And I've heard this from other business owners. in certain businesses, coronavirus has actually helped our business and most people in the fishing business because so many people embraced it to get away from everyday life, and a lot of people had time off, and it's been good for us in that way. I hate to say that because of the misfortune of a lot of people with it, but it's just hard getting stuff. And you got to think about the heart of some of our businesses. You got Sage, Echo, Loomis, they're all located in Washington. And that's kind of the belly of the beast for problems, not only with coronavirus, where a lot of it started, but then you've got all the rioting that's going on up there. So that's been a challenge. Those companies are just plain shut down. And Hairline Dubbin, who to me is the finest fly tying materials supplier in the business. We've got some other great ones, but Hairline's kind of number one. And I'm sure a lot of you guys remember Marcos when he owned Fly and Field. And they just plain can't have people working down there. The Oregon is another state like Washington where they're just telling them you can only have so many people in here. And I've talked to Marcos a number of times. We used to order every single day from them. And we don't do that anymore because they just don't have the stuff. And they've got the raw material, but they just don't have the capability to dye and package because they're working on a skeleton crew because that's what the state tells them they have to do. So, and that's going on in a lot of the fly businesses. Rods are hard to come by. I know Scott is just, they've got a capacity limit of people that are working there. Sage was shut down. Once they sold out their beginning inventory, when it all kind of started, they couldn't build anymore. Loomis was in the same boat at one point, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here because I know some things that go on with some of these companies because of my contracts with them. But at one point, Echo didn't have a single rod in their warehouse. They were completely sold out. So it was very, and still is very challenging to get some of this stuff. And in the beginning, everybody consumer wise was pretty, oh yeah, I get it. And those days are gone. People want the stuff now. And the guys that believed us 4 or 5 months ago don't believe us anymore. And then you compound that with all the issues with the post office. Right here in Milwaukee, down at the airport, they're working on a skeleton crew because of coronavirus. And it's the same way in Chicago. I sent a letter to somebody down in Missouri or one of my reps. I sent a couple of samples back to him down in Kansas City. It took 28 days for the mail to get to him. And it was hung up in the Chicago post office for about 14 days. And people call us and, well, you got to do something. There's nothing we can do about that. What I would tell you guys, you're ordering stuff, I would try to spend the extra money and do it through UPS. Like us, anything over $50, we just cover the shipping, but that's going to be the least expensive way of doing it because those costs keep going up, which is first class mail, but that tends to get hung up. So we're recommending people pay a little bit extra and do UPS on it. So it's been a challenge from the supply end because we have a hard time getting it shipped to us. We have a hard time getting it, and we have a hard time getting it out to the customers. So it has been a challenge, but business has been good. One other thing that's really affected us is the travel end of our business. Every one of our trips got delayed, and I'm leaving for the Bahamas a week from Saturday. And that's just, and we're hoping it's all going to work, but now you got to have health visas, and you're dealing with countries that they don't do things like we do up here. So you just hope it's all going to work and you don't show up and get turned around. It's been going pretty well, but there's more challenges with that. I guess that's an earful on what you asked, Mark.
No, that's a good answer. Questions, anybody, guys?
Yeah, I got one for Pat. One river, one fly, one time of the year. What would your choice be?
I'm sorry.
Favorite river, favorite fly, what type of year? If you could only pick one of each.
What species are you talking about?
Your choice.
Well,
It's the last one you can ever fish.
you know, living up here, and you guys are in the same boat as me, Michigan, Minnesota. We've got some of the greatest smallmouth in the world. And it's not a favorite for me, and I'm pretty lucky because I get to go to some pretty exotic places. But I guess I'd have to be on a smallmouth river somewhere up here. And when you say one fly, if they're going to eat it, I'm hoping they're eating a popper because that's about as good as it gets when you got fish that are on eating on top in a river in northern Wisconsin. So, and I'm not allowed to say what river that is. Just kidding, guys.
You guys, raise your hand if you have a question.
I got a question.
Hey, Fred, go ahead.
It's actually Pete over here. I got a question about Milwaukee. I used to get up there to fish Milwaukee River, and I know there's been a lot of work going on there, removing dams and probably other stuff I don't know about. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about fishing Milwaukee River.
Milwaukee River is quite a success story, figuring there's 1.5 million or so people all around it. As many of you guys know, it's a great anadromous river with the lake run fish that we get from sometime typically in September through, I usually say around May 1st, middle of May. And then it becomes a really, really good smallmouth river. There are dams that have been removed, and there's been a lot of work done by local fishing groups and the DNR up here. And it's a pretty good success story. And that runs all the way up into the town of West Bend. So there's lots of water. There's places where you can float it. A lot of people don't do that, although, one of the things that's really helped us has been the internet in our business. We wouldn't be as big as we are being in Wisconsin because it's not the hotbed of fly fishing like it would be in the Rockies or a place like that. But the downside of the internet is there's no secrets anymore. So somebody catches some fish, throws it up on Instagram or something like that, and all of a sudden there's rafts and canoes and everything else going down the river. So it's a big success story, but you can still find room to fish it. It's just a matter of wandering around and finding some good access. There's a lot of parks in all the little towns and good water all over the place. So, and keep in mind, it's the town of Grafton, about 15, 20 minutes north of downtown Milwaukee, where it's the final dam that you can fish the anadromous fish.
Hey, Fred has to, did you have a question?
Actually, can you guys hear me okay? Because I switched over to something else.
Yeah.
Okay. So a two-part question. I was dangerously close to being able to fish in Argentina. I was wondering if you've ever fished there and your thoughts on that. And the second thing, you just mentioned the Bahamas, and I was wondering if you're hearing more about Walker's Cay.
First one, Argentina. I love that country. People often ask me, what's your favorite country to go fish outside of the States? And it's Mexico. And a lot of people, it's Mexico, they see everything on the news up in the border towns of Juarez and Tijuana and that stuff, and that's their vision of Mexico. But I've got a lot of friends down there. One of my best friends in the whole business of being in it for 33 years, Miguel Encalada, is Mexican, and love going down there. And still, Mexico has its problems. I liken Argentina to being the best of Mexico without the bad parts. And not that there's not bad parts. Any big town, whether it's Milwaukee, Chicago, you're going to have issues with it. So Buenos Aires, great city, places you don't want to go to, but the people down there are so friendly. It's just easy to get around. It's just a great country. I mean, if you haven't been down there and you like doing that stuff, you need to go. Argentina is going to be a little bit late in coming to the dance with all this coronavirus stuff. I was just talking to one of my lodge guys today, And I think they've shut it down for another quarter. I'm not optimistic about 21 for Argentina, but fish Golden Dorado down there and just have a great time in that place. So it's very nice. And then the other thing with the Bahamas, Walker's Cay, that's kind of a funny deal, not to be a name dropper, but Flip Pallett's been a mentor of mine since I started in '88. He's a very dear friend, and I've done Walker's Cay Chronicles with him in the past. And so I know Flip really well. And Walker's Cay is really more of a blue water destination. There's better places to go bone fishing down there. There is some good bone fishing on Walker's Cay. And I really don't know what's going on down there because the infrastructure, what I do in the Bahamas, there's just no lodges that we fish down there. And that's not to say you can't find some fishing. But the whole deal with Walker's Cay is the island or the Chamber of Commerce, whatever you want to call it. They footed the bill for the Walker Cay Chronicles. And just to get people down there, and Flip shows a little bit of fly fishing and a little bit of general tackle and blue water and everything else. So that's kind of the deal on Walker's Cay. Very cool place, but I've only ever flown over it and just never, there's so many other places down there that just never really bothered to go looking at Walker's Cay, if that answers your question.
Yes, I just was curious because I know they had like a hurricane thing come through. The guy was trying to rebuild it.
Yeah, that I don't know about. I don't remember the names of the hurricanes down there, but that one that went through, it was pretty crazy because on Andros, which is the biggest island, there were places on Andros never even got touched, and you go 20 miles away and the lodges were just crushed. And the same thing on Abaco. Guys lost their entire businesses, their homes, their lodges, and you just go up the road on Abaco and they were open weeks after that. So it was just kind of a hit and miss deal on the hurricane. See, I don't know much about what's going on with Walker Cay because we don't do anything down there. And it's not that it's bad. It's just, like I said, it's just, there's nothing there for us to take groups in that.
Annie, did you have a question?
Yeah, hey, y'all, thanks for letting me be a guest. One of your members invited me. I'm calling in from North Carolina. And Pat, congratulations on your 33 years. I've been to your shop a couple of times with my dad, John O'Leary. I don't know if you remember him. Remember Johnny?
Oh, thanks.
The question I have is about the flies. You know, you've got this great business, but you also are really known for the flies you tie. What's your all-time favorite fly? And what's your newest favorite fly, either that you created or that you've learned to create? Thank you.
I'd probably say the Grim Reaper is my all-time favorite because it's the best-selling one. So I made the most money off of it. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it does really work well on bass, both smallmouth and largemouth. And the thing I like about it is I love fishing in general. And that means with spinning rods, with bait casting rods, I just like fishing. And I do a lot of fishing with conventional gear to give me ideas on what to do with flies. And that one was kind of my answer to the jig and pig, which a lot of tournament bass guys, elite fishermen, and just plain really good bass guys ask them what's the one lure that they would want if they could only have one, and it would be a swim jig, jig and pig type thing. And so it's kind of patterned off of that. So I'm kind of proud of how it turned out and how well it fishes, and it did make me some decent money. And I've got quite a number of them. I've just come out with 3 of them for this year. And Rainey's has kind of had a little bit of a time out with new patterns just because of the COVID thing. But I've got a new one called Bottle Rocket, and lack of a better, I don't have one here to show you, but it's basically a rabbit strip streamer with one of Hairline's newer products called Ripple Ice Fiber. Really cool stuff. And the nice thing about the fly, I always try to do this with my patterns because I do so much salt water, I do so much warm water. If it'll catch a tarpon, I want to know if it'll catch a bass. So this thing has worked really well on largemouth, smallmouth. I'm sure it'll work on steelhead too if you put it in front of one or a big brown trout. And it's worked really well on snook and tarpon. So I'm really excited about that one. We're going to have it because I'm the guy tying it, and they're going to produce them for us for this year. And then next year it'll be in their new catalog. And then I've got another one called a tail dragger. And what this one is, it's a shrimp pattern. And bone fishing is just really a blast. But if you look at shrimp patterns, well, it's kind of hard to reinvent the wheel with them. And if you take the McVeigh's Gotcha, you probably go anywhere in the world and catch bonefish on that one. So in actuality, take a couple dozen of those. And I've often threatened to do that, but I just never get around to it, just grabbing a dozen of them and fishing for a week with those. But that just wouldn't be as much fun. I came out with the messing around with this, and basically what it is an articulated tail shrimp because nobody was doing that stuff. And so you're just always looking for something new to catch somebody's eye and hopefully have a new successful pattern. So that would be my two favorite new ones, and the Grim Reaper is kind of my all-time favorite.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mark, did you have a question? You're muted.
Pat, you have been involved pretty significantly with the people at Echo. Tell us really what's involved, or what is the protocol? What goes on in a rod design? I mean, they approach you, you have a relationship with them, you think you can create a better mousetrap. I know you have several rods that you have designed. I mean, what goes into that? What's that all about? Share with us. I mean, the timeline, the effort, what goes into that?
And the history on that, Tim came up to me at one of our trade shows, and this was a trade show for people in the business, not open to the public. And I'd always had a very, very friendly relationship with Tim and a lot of respect for him and his brother. And we got along great. And I was a dealer, and he kind of grabbed me and he says, "Hey, I got to talk to you." And I said, "What's up?" He said, "I would like you to consider designing a line of warm water rods for me." And it just was like a left hook out of left field. He just floored me with that. And it was, I didn't know what to say. And he started laughing. He says, "Yeah, just take your time." And I said, well, instantly, I, being a fly shop owner, see that there could be some conflicts of interest with that. Nice. So he said, "Take your time." And I did, and talked to some people. And basically, it was a way to get exposure for me being in the Midwest and not some hotbed of fly fishing activity, and help to build the name and the brand and everything. So with that particular rod, and then with the EPR, the latest, for me, it's basically the same thing. And I tell people when they ask questions like you just did, Mark, I kind of consider myself like a NASCAR stock car driver. I can go out and drive the car, and I know what it needs to do, and I know what I want it to do, but I can't make it do that. So I take it out for a few laps, and I come back in, and I tell the crew chief, "Yeah, it's a little bit loose in the second turn, or it's a little bit tight in the third turn, this or that, fix it." And so what happens for me, at least with the rod design, was Tim and I sat down and we spent about 3 or 4 hours taking notes. This is what I want to see in it, from action to length to line weights and all that. So you come up with that game plan. And then from there, he starts talking about, well, we need to do this. What do you think for a reel seat, fighting butt? And it's really a complex deal. It's not just 3 hours, we get some samples, you go cast them, and we got a rod. It was, I want to say, 1.5 to 2 year process to get the first one on the market, and the second one was about the same. And so from there, we got the typical action we wanted, and then you have to build up prototypes and see if what Tim and I are thinking about comes out to the same page of, this is what I want. And then he's always the big brother looking over your shoulder that if you kind of get out of line, he swats you in the back and say, that's not going to work because it may not sell. And you always got to consider these rods have to sell. It can be the coolest thing I ever thought I'd see in a fly rod, but if nobody's going to buy it, it doesn't matter. So we work out all those kinks, and then I start getting prototypes, and now we're getting on to something. And once you're in the prototype stage, then you really start picking it apart. And I would literally go out in the back, and it has happened with both of the rods, and I would take the first 3 pieces, as we were pretty much dialed in, and then the tip has to be fitted and figured out. And he would send me 4 or 5 tips, and I would go out in the back and I would start casting rods and changing tips and taking notes. And I would do this for an hour or 2 at a time. And I'd literally be closing my eyes and just kind of feeling it and not looking at it. Then I'd open it up and you'd go through that. Now you got to take a different line. Is this rod going to handle just weight forward? How will it react with a bass line as well? Because we wanted them to handle them all. So then you had to go back and do it again. And I would literally walk away with a headache because you're just concentrating so hard on it. And then there was this question and answer period that I would have with Tim. And what I found out after the first rod was once I went through all of that with each of the tips and what my thoughts were, I sent them back to him. And then they put them on these boards and started doing flex tests. And they started checking on what you're telling them. Because the first time around, Jamie, one of his top guys in the office, he said, that doesn't make any sense what he's telling us. Tim said, well, let's put it on the board and see. And it came out to what I was saying. And Jamie said, cool, that's it. And so here, I didn't even know I had to pass this litmus test of rod action and all that. And you got to take into account the crazy thing about rod design. And it doesn't matter if you're doing a $200 rod or a $1,200 rod, just something as little as a new set of rod guides can completely change the whole action of the rod because they might be a little bit heavier. So it's going to slow the rod down. And it's amazing what a set of guides can do to the retail price of a fly rod. So you got to take into account the cork, the reel seats, the guides, what you're doing with it and all that. And I learned a lot of different things about action because I always, fast tip, fast rod. And Tim said, no, you put a stiff tip on there, it's going to slow the rest of the rod down. You put a little bit softer tip on there, it's going to speed up the rest of the rod. And for all this time, I kind of had some of that stuff backwards. And what was kind of interesting, and we went through that, and then we went through the EPR and kind of did the same stuff. And so it's the same program. And that came out. And we're looking at some new things now. And because of coronavirus, you can't even do it in that kind of a time frame because these companies are so busy pumping out rods that they don't have time to build samples and prototypes in as quick a time frame as you want. So where you're thinking, well, I hope to have samples in 6 months to a year to start working on it, you might not see samples for a year and a half or more. So that's going to kind of retard the development going forward with this stuff. So the question Mark asked before about how's this, working with the business, this is something that most people don't even realize how it's affecting the fly fishing business. It's just things like fly rod prototypes and how that's being slowed down because everybody's trying to get rods out the door to sell them. So that's kind of it. I'm the NASCAR guy that says, all right, Tim, this thing's a little bit too soft or it's a little bit wobbly in the tip. And you really got to concentrate on that because that's where the accuracy comes from. That's where the distance comes from. Do I want to design a rod for 40 to 60 feet for largemouth bass fishing? Or do I want a rod I can throw 90 to 100 feet because I'm out in the flats and I may need to make a long cast to a bonefish or a tarpon? So it is a pretty complex deal and it's really fun. It's really interesting. And then one other little side note to this whole thing. If any of you guys know who Jerry Seam is, Jerry used to be the rod designer at Sage, and he's kind of retired now. And I ran into him after I had my deal going with Echo, and I wouldn't say he's cold to me, but I did some stuff with Jerry in the past when they came out with bass rods and that. And that was where I was talking about the conflicts, because well, he's not going to open up to me on stuff because I'm working with another company. And so after a season or two, and he got to play with some of the rods and stuff like that, I ran into him down at O'Hare getting on an airplane to fly out to Denver for a trade show. Said hi to him and talked to him a little bit. And then I ran into him at the Sage booth. He took me aside, and for 45 minutes to an hour, it was just like, because it was kind of known he was going to be retiring. He just laid it all out for me about what happens when you do this, what happens when you do that. And it was really a cool thing for me, because it was kind of like, and please keep in mind, I helped design these rods. I am not a Tim Rajeff. I'm not a Jerry Seam. I've got my ideas, and I use Tim's talents to help me do this. But it was kind of like I was accepted by Jerry with him opening up on all this stuff. So it was really something that was very flattering to have a conversation with one of the masters of fly casting and rod design. And I learned even more from him about all these little tiny things and this and that. So it's a pretty cool deal, and it's pretty complex. And there's not a lot of people in our business that have the ability to design rods. I mean, think about it. Steve Rajeff's getting older. How long is he going to be around? Jerry just retired. Annette McLean, a good friend of mine, I worked with her on one of the models at Winston. She retired 2 years ago. So it's just kind of interesting. Where's it all going to go from here? Who's going to replace these guys?
So Pat, question then. With all these rods out there that we all have, some of us have more aluminum tubes in our closet than others. How much appreciation should we have for the time and energy that went it? Do all of those things get that level of attention, or is it these Rajeff guys that are maybe a little bit more eccentric, or is that pretty atypical for the industry? Because I mean, we all have, half a dozen, dozens of rods, and how much blood, sweat, and tears went into those things. And we just look at it like, oh yeah, it's a $200 rod, big deal. And really, does price predicate the quality? I mean, is there such a thing as a $400 super quality rod? I mean, and so you don't have to buy a Winston or what?
That's a great question, Mark. So here's the deal with rods. When you see what goes into building one of them, you just go, how are they selling these for $600, $700, $800? And that's just the business guy in me. Because like at Sage, it takes typically 20 to 30 days to start and finish a rod. And somewhere around 25 to 30 people will touch that rod by the time that thing is done. And there's a lot of care goes into them. There's a lot of steps go into it. And, Asquith came out with $1,200 rod, Loomis came out with the Asquith $1,200 rod. And I'm thinking, all right, so is this the end of this? Is this the rod that people say, nah, I'm not buying that? Well, we can't believe how many of those we sell. Now that's relative to the other stuff. And there's definitely been a drop off in the premium rod sales. And some of that is the economy. Some of that is guys saying enough is enough. And for instance, with Sage, I mean, they came out with the Maverick and they came out with the Sonic at $550, and I think they went up to $575 this year. They're great rods. They're just really, really nice casting rods for the money. So they've actually taken a step down in what I might think of as a meat and potatoes rod. And, there's some issues with that, because if they have a race to the bottom, what does that do for fly shops? Because it's just, all of us that own fly shops are just sitting there with this shadow over us called Amazon. And we just wonder, when is the when's the axe going to fall? And they're going to get access to all this, and people are going to maybe not quit coming into the shops, but not so much. And is it going to be the price driving people down on that? So that like the EPR is, I believe that's $469.99 or $479. That might have went up $10. That's kind of in that new sweet spot of what people are buying. But then you look at Scott, they came out with the sectors year before last, won best overall fly fishing item of our entire trade show and the best new saltwater rod. And they would have won that again this year for the Centric, I guarantee you, but we didn't have a show because of COVID. Jim Barchi is one of the finest fly rod design minds, and thankfully he's not that old, so he should be around for a while. And, you know, we're selling a lot of Centrics and a lot of sectors to where we're having a hard time keeping those in stock. So there's this group of guys, gals that want that $400 or $500 rod, and there's folks that still want the premium. So it's keeping the shops going, and the nice thing is it gets folks into the shop to cast them, because I know a lot of people don't want to just chunk down $1,000 and say, I hope I like this rod. So it's good for the fly shop business, but I hope I answered what you're looking for. There's such good rods right now in the $100 to $200 range. There's great rods in the mid price, and there's just exceptional rods in the top end. And the big difference in the cost of that stuff tends to be the raw materials, basically the graphite. And one of the cool things right now, I think this is kind of my prediction, is keep an eye on Elon Musk. Not that he's going to design fly rods, but when NASA got shut down, a good friend of mine used to be the St. Croix rod designer up in Park Falls, and Mike's living out in Pacific Northwest now, working for a different company. But he told me, he said, we're going to take a little bit of a hit with NASA shutting down, because NASA is the reason we have iPhones and Android phones that fit in our pocket and can run businesses off of. It's where NASCAR and IndyCar and Formula One get carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is graphite. It's where the fishing business, whether it's Loomis gear rods or Sage fly rods, get their carbon fiber from, or their graphite. The more that the space programs come out with stuff, the more cool stuff you're going to see. And with a guy like Elon Musk pushing the space program, I think it's going to lead to some really cool stuff in the near future.
Cool. Thank you.
Jim?
I had an itch.
I'm hoping I'm not being too long-winded. It's hard doing this, because when you're doing something in front of people, you know what the reaction of the crowd is. It's just kind of odd doing this and having silence on the back end of it. So hope I'm not going on too long with this.
Oh, it's okay. I know it's difficult for to do it this way, but as opposed to in person. But my question is regarding Wisconsin fishing. Now, as I understand it, you're from the Milwaukee area. Do you find the urban fishing around Milwaukee satisfactory? Like in Chicago, we've got the Kankakee and a few other big rivers around. What's it like in Chicago? I know, or Milwaukee. I know the Milwaukee River goes up north a ways, and then around Grafton you've got, what is it, Cedar Creek? And what other places are there around the urban area of Milwaukee?
Yeah, great question. Cedar Creek is a tributary of the Milwaukee, so it gets a run of fish and it gets good smallmouth in the summer. We've got the Milwaukee. That's kind of the main river around here. We don't have a lot of trout water in the southeast part of the state. There's a couple of trout streams in Waukesha County, maybe half hour out of town, Tishigan Creek. And it's a beautiful little spring creek, and you can just see the water bubbling out of the bottom. And I haven't been on that stream in 25, 30 years, but I have seen brown trout in there 18, 19 inches. it's not a place I'd want to call my home waters. It's there if you were poking around. For me, it was just being a young guy, just kind of slogging around and seeing what's what. There's better stuff. And then you get, maybe 20 miles west of town, Rosenau Creek's another little spring creek out there. A lot of that good water. There's all kinds of places that are spring creeks that dump into the Bark River, that dump into the Milwaukee River. The problem with them is you can't access them. I've gone up smallmouth fishing on the Milwaukee up around Newburgh and that. And I've caught brook trout in the Milwaukee and beautiful ones. But that's kind of a really lucky day that you caught one, because the water conditions were such that the brook trout were in the main river. Then as soon as that gets too warm, they scoot right back up onto these farms, and you can't go up in there and trespass to get them. Kind of the same thing. Rosenau's got some access to it. So there is fishing for those that are willing to get it. The Bark River, that's another really good largemouth and smallmouth river. And the Fox River is the same way. Runs out of the southwest part of the state, or part of the area here, and then runs down into Illinois. And I guess we get, there was up in Waterford, a couple of kids were fishing by the dam. And one of them got a 46, 47-inch muskie and took it home 2 weeks before the season opened. And the warden got called, and I'll give him credit. These kids were 12, 13 years old, and he didn't write them up. Nobody ever saw muskies like that before, but I've heard they're swimming up from the Fox River down in Illinois. I wouldn't go there looking for muskies, but it just kind of tells you it's pretty neat. And it's a really good smallmouth stream, and dumps into Tishigan Lake, which is a really good largemouth place. And then you just go, I can take my bass boat, leave my shop in Brookfield, and in less than a half hour be driving away from the pier on Okauchee Lake, Nagawicca Lake, Pewaukee Lake, lower or upper Nabobbin. There's some really good bass water. Pewaukee is one of the finest bass lakes in the state. The problem with it is those lakes are getting so crowded and the pressure is getting so bad that it's really getting tough to catch fish. But they're still there. And this year was exceptionally bad because everybody stayed home, and every weekend there were so many boats on the water, it was hard to even fish. But the quality of water, there's so many lakes right within a half hour, 40 minutes of Milwaukee. You need to have a boat. There's some small ones. You can get by with canoes. You can get by with float tube type stuff. So there's a ton of fishing opportunities right around here.
Yeah, we've got a question from Keith Sutherland.
Pat, I was going to ask you, have you ever fished on the Menominee River in Milwaukee?
For the steelhead and the salmon and that, yep.
Is there any warm water fishing there, or is it strictly just the unanimous fish run? Yeah,
it's a short river. The Menominee, we get a big rain and there's no fish in there, and 8 hours later it'll be full of fish, and a day or two later they'll all be back down to the lake because it fluctuates quite a bit. You get up into the parks in Wauwatosa, just kind of west of the stadium, Miller Park, and you'd swear that this is as good a smallmouth water as you could find, and I've never heard anybody catching one in there. So it's basically a lake run fishery.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, it fluctuates so much that there's times when it's 2 inches deep, and then we get a big rain and it's 3-4 feet deep. So,
wow, cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Keith, you had a question? You're muted right now.
Yeah, Pat. I was wondering if you were familiar at all with the United States only subtropical fish that's native to the United States. It's a relative of peacock bass, but it only grows to the size of a bluegill. and it's native primarily to Texas. It's called the Rio Grande Perch.
No, that one I'm not. I thought you were going to say the cichlids. I've caught those in the Everglades quite a bit when you get back up into the freshwater areas. But the Rio Grande Perch, no. Sorry, you got me.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a gotcha on purpose. I wondered whether or not you had ever heard of it.
Quite honestly, I've never heard of it. Yeah.
It looks a lot like a butterfly. It's dark with light spots all over its body.
Huh, that sounds cool.
And they are a lot of fun to catch.
Nice.
I moved up here from Austin, so it was a homecoming for me because I was born here, but I moved away and got educated and came back and got my bride and took her back to Texas with me. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate your reply, and hopefully things will turn around for all of us here very soon.
Absolutely.
Maybe the end of summer. Thanks again.
You bet.
All right, Joe has a question.
Yeah, hi, Joe Reyes here. Question pertaining to freshwater rods versus saltwater rods. Now, if you fish up in the Midwest where we're at, and then you want to go on, say, go 4 guys on a trip to, say, Belize or down to your fishing spots in salt water, and you don't have the right amount of rods, what's the cost and renting the rods?
It depends on the lodge that you're going to, but I tell people don't bank on being able to rent equipment. There's a few of them. I'm just thinking like Turner Flats. That's as good a lodge as you can get. It's American owned. They've got the stuff down there that you can rent, and you always want to check before you go down and that they're reserved for you so you don't get down there and somebody else is renting them. But I would just say, there's so many rods nowadays that you can fish bonefish with and bass at the same time, that I would just buy one that you can do it all with and then not worry about it.
So you can buy a couple of rods, maybe 7 and 10 or something to fish, and saltwater lines, right?
Well, I wouldn't go saltwater fishing without an 8-weight. And probably a 10, just depending. Like when I go to the Bahamas, hopefully that comes off in a week or so. I doubt if I'll take a 10-weight down there with me because it's pretty much just a bonefish destination. I'll take a 7-weight and an 8-weight, maybe 2 8-weights. And once in a while I have some prototypes with me to mess around. Those are always going to be 8-weights at a bonefishing place. If you're going, Belize is cool because you can get permit, you can get tarpon, you can get bonefish. So then I'm taking 8s, 9s, and 10s with me. And I may have a 7 with me for the smaller bonefish that you encounter there. Like Turner Flats, I was just there the week before everything shut down, and I had a 6-weight with me for bonefish because you're literally stalking the reef and you might be casting 15 feet like you were trout fishing, and the bonefish aren't that big, but they're very challenging. So typically an 8 and a 10 weight should take care of what you need. And if you break your 8-weight and you're down there, you just cast a bonefish with a 10-weight. What's the difference? It's better than not fishing.
So would it be okay to bring your freshwater rods down there then?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're buying quality rods from these companies, they've got all the saltwater reel seats in that. They're really, there is saltwater models and that, but to me, when I hear saltwater, it doesn't mean this is made for the salt. And it really, it's always been a problem for me when I see the catalogs come out, the new ABC company saltwater rod, because it might turn some guy off in the Midwest. Well, I don't need a saltwater rod in here. It's one of the finest casting bass rods you could ever buy. So anytime you see saltwater, don't think of it as freshwater or saltwater. Think of it as high performance. And then there's a little bit on that, like the Salt HD from Sage. That's one of the few that's really designed for just fishing the flats. And that would not be a fun rod to fish bass with or steelhead or that. But if you take the X rod from Sage, the Maverick, you can fish fresher saltwater with those. The EPR from Echo, that's what we designed it for, was to cover all the bases. The Sector from Scott, same deal. NRXs, Asquith from Loomis. Those are all rods that'll handle both of them. You don't really see any kind of issues with using them fresh or salt. As said, it's mostly around performance. When you get to the lines, it's a completely different story. You want to spend the money and get a saltwater line if you're going down there. And the reason for that is what people don't realize is, you know, a lot of people know that saltwater, there's more buoyancy in saltwater than there is fresh. They design the lines around that. So there's less flotation in a saltwater tapered line than there is in freshwater, because you don't need the floatability for it. And what that does by putting less flotation in it, whether it's micro bubbles or however the company achieves that flotation, they can make them thinner. And if they're thinner, they're not as affected by the wind as much, and they're easier to cast a longer line, less friction in that. So and plus they typically have stiffer cores to deal with the heat, although most of the bass lines in that will handle hot weather, because if you're bass fishing in Florida or Texas, and it gets hot up here, as you all know, in July and August. So that's not so much of a deal anymore. But the big thing is the floatability of a saltwater line. And you come up here and try fishing bass poppers or something with a saltwater line, it may be sinking enough to not allow your poppers to work right. So you want to pay attention to the line design.
So when you're up fishing here and say you have a saltwater rod, say a 5, it would, if you don't know that much about a rod, it wouldn't make a difference to a person.
Well, 5 weights. Sage used to make a 5-weight bonefish rod, and it was more of a novelty than anything. I don't think it lasted more than 2 years. You won't find saltwater rods now that are less than 6 weights, and those are really niche specific as well. So you're dealing with rods, and you want the fighting butts on the saltwater species because you got fish that run a lot. You want to be able to tuck that up into your chest here when you're reeling. So I'm not talking about taking a trout rod and going out saltwater fishing, even with a 6-weight or a 7-weight. And keep in mind, you take a beautiful Winston down to the salt or one of the Sages with the nickel silver reel seats, it'll be ruined in a day. And especially if they got wood reel seats. So you want a rod that's going to be a game fish rod. Let's not call it a trout rod. Game fish rod is something I would fish for steelhead, salmon, bass, pike, muskie, saltwater species.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Right, PJ. Yeah.
Oh, my question is obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of challenges in that with just everything. You were kind of talking about it was a boom for business, but now you're not able to get materials and stuff for people. What is the feeling for the industry for retaining all these people that are getting into the sport? What have you heard? Again, I've seen a lot of people in the driftless. Obviously, last year we saw a lot more people on the streams in that. Some of it was good, some of it was bad, but what's your feeling for retaining these people with this kind of boom once things kind of clear up?
Yeah, I've had my shop long enough to know about the river runs through it scenario. when there were people buying fly rods just because Brad Pitt was fly casting. And those rods got purchased and they're probably still in the closet to this day. This is a little bit different because people didn't see this up on the screen. They saw it as something to get them outdoors and go fishing. I didn't realize how many new people were coming into it till there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about it. And with us being a national fly shop, you know, we're seeing new people all the time because if this shop can't get it, they search for it online and we might pick up a new customer if we have it. So that really, it didn't cross my mind that we're getting these people because they're new to the sport. We thought we were getting it because they were looking for product they couldn't get anyplace else. But then we started seeing new people coming into the shop itself, and a lot of new people. And you know what? They're still coming in, and they were coming in all summer and into the fall. Now these guys are tying flies. And to me, in the beginning, with the river runs through it, it was like captain's licenses used to be. You just go down and get it rubber stamped, and you had a Coast Guard captain license. And these guys with the big sailboats would hang them in their sailboat as kind of a status symbol that I'm a captain. Well, that all changed. And especially after 9/11, our testing programs and all that stuff are really, really tough to get one of those licenses now. With the River Runs Through It group, buy the rod, I can't cast this. And I can't tell you the number of times I want to cast like Brad Pitt. Can you show me how? And I said, yeah, if you don't want to do it the right way, we can go out. I charge as much to teach you the wrong way as I do the right way. And what they didn't understand was, if you look at that movie, it's kind of fun for me because I know so many people in it. And Gary Borger's kid did the casting in that. And at the time I was under an agreement with Scientific Anglers, and they were making special lines for that movie just so they showed up better on camera. They were thicker, they were a different color so that the cinematography worked better. So it was all just kind of movie BS, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But that really got people going. And when they realized they couldn't cast and they couldn't catch fish, well, what's the new thing to go do? The difference with this new group is now they're coming in and buying fly tying materials. That tells me they're into this deal. The other group, buy the rod, put it in the closet, go do something else. These guys want more. So I think there's something to it. I think there's going to be some of them that fall off just because that's just human nature. And especially with fly fishing, you guys know this. If you can't cast, you're not going to have a lot of success. And most people, they don't want to take the time to learn to cast. And but there's guys that are, and they're coming in to do lessons and they want to have some success, and they catch a couple of fish, they're on their way, and it's cold out. What do I do now? I'm going to tie flies. So they're kind of be interesting to see what happens in the spring. But I think a lot more people are in it for the long haul now than had been in the past.
Great. So kind of along that lines, with like I said, coming in and you're seeing them tying flies, so that makes them a little more invested than just buying a rod and trying to cast like Brad Pitt and all that. So are you hearing, or is your shop doing, I mean, I know now it's so tough with COVID, but are you planning on trying to do stuff more for the beginner? Are you hearing either clubs or industry folk just trying to retain them? I mean, this is a big boom. This is a chance to build on this. Again, it's also a chance to educate. You know, some of these new people I was seeing on the water, you know, they didn't understand always some of the etiquette. You know, they'd pull up into a spot in the driftless, and there'd always, you know, if there was a car there, they didn't know, just go down to the next put in. Well, sometimes it just takes a kind word as opposed to being all upset and going on the internet and blasting them, whatever. But
yeah, that's a good question. Great points. There's nothing going on up here. We won't do any classes. You know, we get the people one-on-one in the store. I just had to go to the doctor today, and my GP guy, I was going in for a yearly checkup, and this guy, I kind of knew him through the shop and that stuff, and he's a really good doctor. My guy retired right in the middle of COVID. He just, I had enough and got a letter, I'm done. So I was in there, and when I walked in, they hit you with the thermometer. They ask you a number of questions. You know, do you have symptoms? I'm sure you've all been through this. And then the last question was, have you traveled recently? So I'm in there talking to the doctor, and I got to get this COVID test. So I had him schedule one for me for next week before I go to the Bahamas. And I say, hey, let me ask you, what if I had been traveling? And I said, what would have happened with this appointment? And he started laughing. He says, he said, you called our bluff. He said, you know, you're the first guy who asked that question. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to know what happens because I'm going to the Bahamas. And if I got to go to the doctor. And he said, nothing's going to happen. And I looked at him, I said, liability? He said, absolutely. He said, we do all that stuff and ask all those questions for liability reasons. And it's kind of the same for us. We don't want somebody coming in getting sick, whether it's in a bar down the street or up north fishing or whatever, and saying, well, I was in a fly tying class at that place and that's where I caught it. And you know, and I know you can't prove any of that stuff, but we just don't want anything to do with it because it's just such a wild card as to how this is all shaken out in that. So in the club scene up here, you guys are an anomaly. I mean, it's just amazing that you have all these meetings in a month. Up here, the club scene has just disappeared, and Trout Unlimited up here has over 900 members, and they might get 10 or 11 people at a meeting back before when they could meet. And you guys got to be proud of what you've put together and how you keep that thing going, because I don't think that's normal with clubs. And when you talk about, you know, kind of the stewardship of instructing these people, that's just up to all of us on the water. I had a deal. I know my buddy Kyle Bowerman's out there somewhere because I saw him check in when we were waiting. And Kyle and I guided together on the Missouri for a number of years out in Montana. And there's a mutual friend of ours, this Ron, that I guided with on the Bighorn. And I was going down the river, and this guy come in and he cut me off and just about took the oars out of my hands. And so I'm coming to the takeout, and it was kind of a tricky deal because if you miss it, you're going another 3 or 4 miles. And I don't even know how I pulled off dropping that boat in between the other two to park it and not miss the takeout because this guy was sitting right there in the way. And I was getting ready to give him an earful because my guys paid and this and that. And I looked, and it was a guy about 25, 30 and his dad. And they had a rental boat. This guy had no clue what he did to me, and he wasn't doing it on purpose. And I thought if I would have went in there and just started chewing on this guy, I'd have ruined a cool day for them. So I went up to him and I said, so how'd your day go? And they both, oh, this was so cool. We don't get to fish much. And we rented a boat and we caught all these fish and everything. And we're got 3 more days. And I said, well, back there a bit, you passed me up and you kind of cut a cross on me. And I said, that's not cool. You might want to watch doing that. Just be careful. Because some of the other guides might not take that too kindly because there's some salty old guys in that river. Yeah. And the guy looked at me and said, thank you. I didn't know that. I was completely wrong, totally ignorant. And him and his dad, let's go get a beer. This was an awesome day. Had I gone in there and just started snorting and stomping on this guy, I would have ruined a great trip for him. So that was really a lesson to myself that luckily I didn't say anything. And I wasn't, when I guided, I never yelled at people and stuff, but this was, it was kind of dangerous, in fact. And I'm so glad I didn't. And it taught myself a lesson on guiding and taking care of people. And that's why it's up to all of us. You got some knucklehead that's low holing you, go have a talk with them. And if it's not going to be any good, you know what, fishing's just not worth arguing about. Go somewhere else.
Mark, did you have your hand up in real life? No?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So we're sitting around in the wintertime, just passing some time at the Vice, and every once in a while you out of boredom, you sort of start making you go, walk us through, if we think we've really hit the jackpot with a tie or a design, what are the possibilities, and how do you go about marketing that or patenting it or selling it or just getting the word out? Is that like a one shot in a million, or is there actual?
No, it's not. But so basically you're dealing with Umpqua Feather Merchants, Rainey's Flies. Those are the top two fly companies, and they do have royalty tires like myself. I don't want to say something that sounds like, yeah, don't bother. If you got something cool, you send it in. And I think both of those companies have the protocol to follow on their websites as to how to do that. If you know somebody who's a signature tire for one of these companies, you may want to ask them to be your go-between. And, who do I send this to? How do I do this? Give me a little better chance. Can I use your name? Just be careful of doing that you're not putting somebody on the spot and putting them in an awkward position. And here's the other thing about it. There's very few people that really make a lot of money off of the royalties of tying flies. John Barr with the Copper John, when he tied that fly, he hit frickin' jackpot. There's so many of those flies have been sold. And it's kind of a joke around here in that we've got a big fly shop, but I ran into one of the reps from the Rocky Mountains with one of the reps from here at a lodge in the Bahamas, and we were talking about fly sales and that. And he said, I sell more grasshoppers to 2 shops on this river in Colorado than my buddy, our rep, sells in his entire territory. So you look at that and you go, holy cow, that's quite a bit. Now, the problem with it is, and I submitted some trout flies to Rainey's this year, and Jesse, riding Rainey's son, he said, here's the deal with trout flies, don't even bother. He said, you have to have something so different nowadays that stands apart, like the Copper John did when it came out. Now everybody's knocking off the Copper John and doing what John Barr did, putting their variations on it. So the trout game is really hard to break into. And the guys that get into these things, the bigger name tires, the guys like myself that have the contracts, you're kind of protective of that stuff because it's our livelihood a lot of times. Everybody that's a contract tire is not making their living at fly fishing, but there's a number of us that are. And I would never say anything, don't do it or whatever. But yeah, you got to be careful. If you're going to do that stuff, you take a guy like Blaine Chocolette, good buddy of mine, one of the most innovative people I've ever met fly tying wise. And Blaine just really, he blew the whole thing up with the game changers. And he's got all these different patterns he based off of it. That's his deal. That's the most innovative thing, I think, to come down the wire since the Copper John, and before that, a Clouser Minnow. Blaine's really making some hay with that. And he's with Flyman Fishing Company, which make a lot of the cool fly tying materials and that. And it's a great little company down, I think it's in North Carolina. And he was with Umpqua and left them for whatever business reasons he had. And I'm not going to be nosy and ask him why, but it's a tough thing to get into. But here's the deal. You tie up 6 flies, you put a letter together saying why you fish it, where you fish it, how you fish it, and send it in. And at worst, you just lost 6 flies.
So it's a long shot.
Yeah, it probably is a long shot. And I know one guy that he finally got some flies in, and that started as, I just want to have my name on something, to why aren't you selling more of them? And that's the fly game. There's so many patterns. We've got 1,300 patterns in our shop. I could put another 1,300 in there and still have more to go out and put in there. Yeah. So it's just kind of a tough deal. There's not a lot of money in it. you really need to have quite a number of patterns or a home run like John Barr does. And besides hitting a home run, John's got a lot of patterns in there as well. But he's extremely well connected because he's in the backyard of Umpqua in Colorado. And when John walks into the office with something new, they're probably going to grab it. If you walked in with something, they may say, "Oh, thanks, we'll take a look at it." So it's one of those deals. It's not so much anymore who you know, it's who knows you.
Okay.
And I don't mean to be mean-spirited about it. If you got something, send it in. All they can do is say no. And if it doesn't work at one company, send it to another.
Okay.
But
Thank
just
you.
kind of be aware of the limitations of making a lot of money on it.
No, it was more just bragging rights or a little ego stroke than making a lot of money.
Yeah, because you won't make a lot of money.
Well,
So,
How's your son doing with his fly fishing endeavors?
Jared's doing really well. He just finished up our catalog. And so he's been spending the last 2 months behind a computer doing all of that. He was just up north ice fishing actually a week ago. And now he's just waiting for the weather to break and some water to open up. It's kind of too bad because we've gotten so busy. It's hard for both him and I to be gone at the same time. And so where I used to be able to bring him along on some of the saltwater trips, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Just because we can't afford to both be gone from the shop at the same time. So I'm hoping to get a couple. I've got that Miguel I was talking about. It's got a new operation. Pretty easy, just north of Cancun a bit. We're hoping to get down there for a long weekend or something. And my youngest son's working with us semi full time right now, if that's a real thing. He got 4 years in with the Marines, and now he's finishing up a business degree, and he's still got a couple of semesters to go. So when he's not at school, and that's easy now because he doesn't have to go to school, he's working in the store. So he's getting to the point where he can probably take some stuff over, and he's really getting into it, and got some patterns going in as well. So both of them are doing pretty well, thanks.
All right, any other questions?
Somebody, before this thing started, somebody made a mention about a Renzetti that wasn't working. If somebody had a question, Renzetti Vice.
That Joe Reyes, was that yours? You're muted, Joe.
It was Jim.
Oh, it was Jim.
I don't know if he's still here. He may have left.
Jim,
No,
where?
I'm here.
Which Jim?
You had a Renzetti question.
I got it to work. It wasn't rotating. But I got it to go now.
Somebody else had a question or something?
I have one more. What is your tried and true secret all-time best saltwater reel cleaning procedure when you come back from a trip?
Kind of depends on the reel. Some of them
You
are,
have a really expensive T-bore reel.
all right, T-bore's a good one. Not that the other ones aren't too, but Ted Jurasek, who is T-bore is Hungarian. That's his first name in Hungarian. So when he came to the States, his name became Ted. If anybody out there knows Ted, he is about as crazy and outspoken a person as there is. And I asked him one day at one of our trade shows, I said, so, what's your thoughts on taking these things apart? Because if you ever took a T-bore apart, you better have some paper toweling and keep an eye on where the springs are going because of all the grease and stuff in there. And I won't share his colorful language and how he answered it, but he basically said, I don't want anybody screwing around with these things. I put enough grease in them, you don't need to take them apart. So with the T-bores, basically all you got to do is rinse them off. And if you got one of the newer T-bores, that the seal drag ones, take them apart, a little warm water, a little soapy water, clean them up. Don't worry about getting too deep into them. And if you got the old school one with the cork drag and all the grease inside of there, I would tell you just leave it and rinse it out with warm water. One of the things you don't want to do cleaning any saltwater reel is to use a fast jet of water, like you're powering off the salt, because that'll literally drive salt into places it shouldn't be. So just rinse it off and wipe it down, let it air dry for a little bit. When I come home, I've been cleaning them throughout the week, rinsing them down every day. And then when I come home, I just take them into the kitchen sink and a little warm soapy water, let them dry out. They're good to go. And that goes for most of them, whether it's Ehlers or Sages or Tibors.
Do you get all uptight about backing and fly line and stuff like that? Okay.
The fly lines, I'll clean those. And so here's a guilty little pleasure of mine that I should probably let you guys in on. I'm really not good on cleaning fly lines. And it's because I get so many of them to play with that I'm kind of spoiled. So I don't do as good a job with fly lines as I should. But what I do with them, and I know Rio has got them, it's just those little dry pads, the Wonder Cloths. And I just take that, you just dampen them a little bit in fresh water, wring the water out, and just run your fly line up and down it a couple of times, and you're good to go for the most part. I don't ever use fly line cleaners. With all the lines, with the exception of airflow, they are what's that chemical thing? PC, whatever it is. Polyurethane is what the airflows are. All the rest of them aren't. And all the other ones, the Rios, the SAs, doesn't make them bad lines, but they have plasticizers in them. And so as you're casting them, the plasticizers bleed out, and it keeps them lubricated and keeps them casting well. So you just want to take and run that cloth on them. The problem with fly line cleaners is it's like cleaning your carpet. Clean your carpet 2 years after you put it in. The next time you're going to have to clean it in a year, the next time in 6 months, because as you put cleaners on, it bleeds out these plasticizers, which brings and collects more dirt in the long run. And so I don't ever use cleaners on them. When they get that bad, I just replace them. So I'm just a guy who dry clean with a Wonder Cloth and let her go with that. If you got to put a line cleaner on to make your line work, you need to buy a new line. You're at the end of the lifetime of that.
Okay.
Who wants to go to Donna? I can't hear you. You're not muted. I don't know. I think he's having connection problems. Fred, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Just a quick question about the fiberglass. Seems to be like a lot of guys are starting to get into fiberglass.
You just asking my thoughts on fiberglass?
Or are you seeing people come into the store asking for it, or is it still as popular as it might have been like a year or so ago?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it never gets asked. What we typically don't see is a lot of sales in the high-end fiberglass. You know, guys pick them up and they realize this is a $500-600 fiberglass rod that's as soft as a noodle. I don't know if I want to spend the money to find out I really don't like this. But the inexpensive ones, like from Echo and Reddington, they're doing okay. Fiberglass, there's kind of a culty following to that stuff in a lot of ways. The Echo, Tim Rajeff loves glass, and he had the badass glass rods a couple of years ago, 9 foot, 8 weight, 9 weight, I think a 10 weight. And they were kind of fun to play with. And Jared, my son, he's a big muskie guy. And he messed around with the 10 weight just to try to catch muskies on fiberglass, but they were heavy, super slow. So what Tim did was he shortened them up and called them the Quick Shot Badass Glass. And these are like 8-foot fiberglass rods and 8, 9, and 10 weights now. They're wonderful. I always have one with me on saltwater trips because they're just fun to play with. And I've cast them on windy days. You definitely got some limitations. And one of the cool things about it is, I think in some ways it makes you a better caster because you really got to pay attention to what you're doing when you're casting those. Whereas a fast action rod, you just kind of go into ninja mode and how you're casting and it goes out there. But all of a sudden you put that fiberglass in your hand. And I think that's, it's never going to be like longbows are to bow hunters, guys that are shooting wheel bows and now they just want to go back to the old school longbows. There's more guys doing that are going to do it with fiberglass. But the guys who get one of those rods, in 90% of the fiberglass that we're selling are those quick shot, bigger ones for game fish. So that's kind of a yes and a no. We're not seeing a lot of action in the trout sized rods, but we are in the bigger ones. That's a great question, though, is nobody talks about fiberglass that much, but yet we do get guys coming into the shop and buying them.
Because I don't know how I got latched onto it, but I bought I can't remember, a Lamaglass.
Sure.
Bought one of their fiberglass rods, and I just like the action because I liken a fly rod to a shock absorber. So if I have a fish on, I don't want to really, especially a trout, I don't want a really stiff rod and see the thing go ping. So I always started trying to go towards softer rods, and then I got a Tom Morgan that I built up, and I really love that rod, just the action and the progression of it.
Yeah, Lamaglass used to be a really big deal back when I got into this thing 30 some years ago. And they were out in that Loomis area in Washington. And then they just kind of went away. I don't know if all the high modulus graphite just kind of blew them out of the water and everybody started getting into the high performance end of things. And too bad, because it was a good company. They had good quality stuff, but they just kind of went away. And maybe there's somebody that resurrected the brand or that, but we don't ever see any of it. So just kind of a cool thing to go play with. I like messing around with them, but I wouldn't want to have to fish with them all the time. I get too nervous, too much ADD in my casting.
All right, anybody else? Just speak up.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention about fiberglass rods. You were talking about those, and one of the ones I like are the real old ones from the 1970s, the Fenwicks, the Brownings, and I use those around here on some of the little smallmouth streams, and they handle beautifully. I use a bass bug caper with them, and I cast clousers or poppers with them, and they are an absolute blast of fish. It's like you said, though, you have to slow your casting stroke down to get them to work properly, but when you do, man, that's like heaven. And for some reason, I like the older ones. Like I said, the Brownings, the Fenwicks, they can't really buy anymore, but you have to look on eBay or something to find one.
Yeah, another one, the old ugly sticks, the old white ones.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot, I think those things are back in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool because it's really traditional, and it's where a lot of people way back when started their fly fishing career.
Right.
I had to deal with
that
8-weight badass glass.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of years ago when it first came out, I was down in the Bahamas and we were wade fishing, and I saw a big bonefish coming, 7-8 pound fish. And that's what I had in my hand. So I made the cast, and it was kind of windy, and I just thought about it and got the cast where it needed to be and hooked that fish. And oh my God, the cork was bending. When that fish took off, I had never experienced anything like that. It was so cool having that fiberglass rod in my hand. So there's definitely some fun stuff about it. And the nice thing is, if you want to play with that stuff, like on that Echo end of things, you're not spending $500-600 on fiberglass. It's a lot less money to get into those. So it doesn't have to be your primary rod and limit you.
Mm-hmm.
You can fish it when the mood strikes you.
Yeah, these are about $125, $150 at most. And like I said, they're nice rods, and for the little bass streams around Chicago area, to me they're perfect.
Cool. And there's nothing better than fishing big largemouth poppers with like one of those old ugly sticks.
Mhm.
You just slow down and let it get out there. You don't need to cast 80 feet.
Right.
And it's just fun when you hook them. So there's definitely something to that.
Mhm. Exactly. Okay.
So Pat, you've been wearing that hat all night. Give us a plug for your new boat company. Come on, you're working.
Yeah, there's a reason for this shirt and this hat. I signed on, I left Ranger and went to Vexus. And Vexus is the old Ranger people. Forrest Wood, who started all that, his grandsons had taken over the company. And he's one of the finest gentlemen you'll ever meet. He is the biggest, when he was alive, the biggest private landowner in Arkansas. And you'd never know it talking to him. He was like everybody's grandpa. So when these guys sold out, and I don't know the particulars of Johnny Morris coming in and buying Ranger, because it was a package deal. It was more of a holding company. But his two grandsons and the other three principals just, they didn't want to work for Johnny Morris. So they left. 5-year no compete clause, and they instantly started working on a new boat. But they couldn't do anything because of their no compete. So I was down at the Ranger meetings one day and I saw a sign sitting next to it, next to the factory. And that was where Forrest Wood's museum was. And it was laying on the ground, and it was kind of, what was this logo here? And it said, the revolution is coming, and it was laying on the ground. And one of my Evinrude Ranger contacts looked at me in the truck and he said, "Take a look at that." And I said, "Yeah, what the heck is that?" He said, "There's some big news coming." He didn't even know what it was, but he said, "There's something coming." So long story short, they started Vexus a couple of years ago, and it's the old guys. I don't mean elderly. I mean, it's the old crew. Ranger's back with a new brand as far as the main people. A lot of the factory help move from Ranger over to Vexus because they're both in that little town of Flippin, Arkansas. And the reps came back. And so it's all the guys from the original Ranger. It's pretty exciting being on the leading edge of this. And then Evinrude shut down, and those motors are built 25 minutes from my house, and they shut down, and about 300 people lost their jobs there. So Mercury was kind enough, and it's another Wisconsin company, to sign me on. But when I do stuff in public now, there's some real contractual things I need to do. And when you got a couple, 3 companies that you represent and they all want that left-hand logo when you're on TV, it's like, what shirt do I wear? What hat do I wear? So this one, I had to do this. So, because we have certain standards we have to meet with getting out to the public and all that. Well, now we can't do that. So by you guys asking me to do this, you fulfill some of my obligations with these.
Why we're here, Pat.
And I appreciate that as much as anything. But so that's the deal with it and why I'm wearing it. And
no, tell us about it. What's going on? What are they going to roll out?
Well, the cool thing about it is, and they started out with an aluminum hybrid boat. So there was some fiberglass parts in it, but aluminum hull. And now they've got the Deep V and the bass boat model. They've got a VX20 and a VX21, 20 and 21 foot boat. I've got the 20. And I haven't broke the news to my wife yet. It's a foot too long for our garage. And so somehow I'm going to have to get that thing in there all cockeyed, and we're not going to have vehicles in the garage after February sometime. But they're wonderful bass boats. These guys have been working for 5 years to kind of break the mold. They've got new, you go see these boats being made. It's kind of like I was talking about with fly rods. They got molds and it's all this fiberglass and it stinks in there, and people have moon suits on, and you go into the Vexus place and it's all injection and fusion to where they put this stuff in. It's plastic wrapped and they suck the air out of it into the mold. You don't even need to wear respirators. There's no fiberglass smell anymore. they're just breaking a lot of the rules of building a bass boat, in the design of the boat, how it runs, just things that have never been done before. So I'm really excited. I mean, sometimes you worry about being one of the beta guys, but in this instance, I'm really excited about it because there's so much knowledge coming into this company, and to be asked to be in the beginning of this thing, I'm really appreciative of that. And my new boat should be ready sometime in mid to late February, and I can't wait to get it, even though it's going to be frozen up here. It'd be pretty exciting platform to be fishing off of.
Are they glass or aluminum?
Yes, fiberglass. Yeah, all the high quality, high end bass boats are all going to be fiberglass, but it's just they're playing with new, like I was talking before with the new graphites and all that stuff, new mixes and new ways of painting and new this and new that. For 5 years, they've been changing the way the business is done, and hence the revolution is coming, and it's hit the water. They didn't even have elite pros fishing out of those boats last year. There's just a few of them starting to come over. So pretty exciting to be that new into the company for me.
Is it going to be the high-end price point like Ranger? Probably.
Yeah, it's big time money.
Okay.
I'm not going to beat around the bush. You get those boats, they're expensive. But the good thing about it is the resale value is high. And the other thing is you can fish one of those boats for 10 or 20 years if you keep it. And it'll still take care of you if you take care of the boat. They last a long time. It's super high quality stuff. But, back to that question about fly rods and that, I was doing an event 3-4 weeks ago at the Cabela's up here for Humminbird and Minn Kota, because I've got a contract with them as well for box store stuff. And a guy come up to me and talking about the Solex 15s, and they're $36.99. And he said, "So when are people going to quit buying these?" And I looked at him and I said, "I've been thinking about that $1,000 fly rods and $800 waders. Here's my answer. They're not going to stop buying them. I don't care what price tag they put on it. If it's high quality, somebody's going to buy them." And it's kind of the same thing with these boats. And what tells me that is there's a 4-month wait to get one of these things.
Wow.
So, and it's the same at Ranger. If you order a Ranger today, because I still have contacts with that, I don't think you would get that boat till April or May.
Wow.
So there's plenty of people out there wanting to buy them.
Cool.
Anybody else?
What's your favorite color of Reaper to throw for smallmouth?
Different days, different colors. I guess I'm kind of partial to the root beer one because of the crayfish connotation of it. And the chartreuse one works well. The black one works well. It's all the bass colors. But if you made me pick just one, I would go with the crayfish just because it's such an important food source for the bass, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth. And one thing about that, as long as this is just kind of a sit down and talk thing, for you guys tying flies, I was lucky. I was up north, one of the lakes in the Upper Peninsula, and the University of Notre Dame was doing a study on the rusty crayfish. And we just stumbled on all these kids up there doing this. I'm looking at them, and they're in boats, and they're just kind of hanging over the side of the boat, looking down in the water. And I saw these white things in the water. I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they had these 12-inch, 1 foot by 1 foot tiles down in the bottom of the lake. And they had all these different crayfish on it because it was a rusty crayfish infestation. And so they took a mustad snap that you would use on a spinning rod or something and pierced a hole in the tail of the crayfish and poked this thing through and tied them off and set them on there so that they could observe this crayfish on this white tile. And so they were really good. And I said, "So what are you guys finding out?" And they said the really big crayfish They don't like messing with them because they fight back and they get them in the lips with their claws, and those fish actually back off. The only way they'll eat a big one is if there's no more small ones left on any of the other tiles. I said, well, what's the size that you find? And they said it's, about 2-3 inches, which had a lot to do with my sizing of that Grim Reaper. That's what made me think about it. And the other thing was, they said 95% of the time they eat those things with the claws out. They don't come in from behind and eat them. They come in, the crayfish goes in a defensive position. If it's not too big, they just swoop in and eat it. So when you're designing your crayfish, you may want to think about that stuff. 2 to 3 inches long, and try to get it to where it's swimming backwards in a defensive position, and maybe a little bit more productive for you than something else.
Cool.
And that's just being lucky on the water and running into that. That could take a guy 5 years to figure out, and I figured it out in 5-10 minutes because I was lucky to stumble on those kids up there.
Well, I think Pat has been more than generous with his time tonight. It's going on 8:45. He's almost out of vodka there, so we should probably let him go. So what do you got planned? What's going on? I know you got to go out of state. He put off a meeting with his new company to do this tonight, so I thank him for that, and I appreciate it very much. So we want to thank you, Pat, for being our first guest speaker in this virtual age. It worked out very well. I hope you were comfortable. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And we would love to have you back again when conditions get a little more conducive to maybe a personal visit. We'd love to have you come down and pay us a visit.
I'm flattered that you would like me to do that. I had such a good time. Last time I was down between the fly tying class and then doing the thing at the college that night. It was just a blast. And like I said, you guys really need to give yourself a pat on the back for how you guys just keep pumping these things out and keeping people around. And that's really cool. And I'm really flattered that you guys want me to be a part of it with this. And I thank you for asking me to do it. I was kind of nervous, as I told you, Mark. I told Mark, I'm not doing any PowerPoints. I'm not doing any fly tying. And I do our website stuff at the shop, and I'm not afraid of computers. I only ever did one Zoom thing before, and it was a disaster. And I was just kind of worried about embarrassing you guys by having me do it. So this is kind of nice. I don't know if you guys remember Diana Rudolph, and you guys know her. Used to work, I don't know if she worked for Marcos or Andy Kukulis down there, but Diana is a very close friend of mine, and she was doing a seminar at one of the shows, and she was just sitting in a chair talking to a group of people. And I grabbed her and I said, "Hey, come here, Diana." I said, "You got to stand up. It's just not cool to sit down and do this." And she didn't know. And she said, "Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that insight." So she stood up and she said, "Oh, yeah, just you feel more in command." I got to tell you, this is pretty cool sitting down and doing one of these things. So, well, thanks again. I appreciate it, guys. And thanks for attending. I hope it was good for you.
And I want to give the guys in the club a little plug for the fly fisher here, Pat, because I have been blown away. We have some really nice shops close by, but guys, if you can't find something, I have ordered a number of things from Pat's shop, and there's a guy up there by the name of Ben. And if you get him early in the morning,
that's Bart.
And if he gets it together, you'll get your package usually the next day. It's kind of blows away.
Don't say that these days.
Oh, I mean, even the stuff I ordered the other day came in 2 days. So
good. It'll get out that day, but
I'm tickled.
Mercy to UPS or USPS.
Don't forget about him. He's got a very extensive inventory, and sometimes he has things that other people don't have. So if you can't live without it, give him a call.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank
Pat,
you.
Thank you. You're a super guy. You're an asset to the industry. We appreciate having you, and thank you again for doing this with us. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Tight lines. Thank
Pat.
you.
Take
Okay,
care.
guys.
Good. Lot of fun.
Happy New Year.
Good. Thanks, Pat.